Okay. I welcome everybody. I'm Michael Mikowski. I'm the president and CEO of JINSA. I have the great honor, and it's also a personal treat to have Natan Sharansky join us again, my old friend. I don't think he needs much of an introduction, but I'll just say quickly for the few of you who don't know who he is, former leading civil rights, human rights leader in the Soviet Union, the former leading refusenik in the Soviet Union, had the distinction of serving 9 years in Soviet prison before he was released, I believe, in 1986, and former Israeli minister, a government minister, and also former head of the Jewish agency. I believe Natan, each of those were 9 years. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
I try to keep it equal. 9 years in prison, 9 in the government, 9 Jewish agency. Yeah.
Okay. And as I read, and I encourage everybody, if you haven't looked at it, there was an excellent interview with him in the Weekend Wall Street Journal a couple of weeks ago. And as he said there, I think he found it easier being in prison in the Soviet Union than being an Israeli government minister. Is that right? Not that.
Well, I think in any government, it's not a pleasure. So
Yeah.
I wouldn't exclude Israeli one.
Yeah, you resigned twice from government, you said, but you didn't resign once from prison.
Yeah,
So,
that's true.
okay. All right. Well, look, thank you, Natan, for joining. Let me get right into it. Obviously, we're here we want to talk about war in Israel and rising anti-Semitism that's happened in light of the war in October that began October 7th. Let me ask you an initial question, and I have many, but it's early. It's still 30 days, about 30 days in, or 31 days since the barbaric assault on Israel. How do you think what happened on October 7th, and then the subsequent, what you've seen around the world, how do you think it's affecting Israeli society, the way Israelis are thinking about security, how they're looking at the Palestinian issue, just a range of issues, how they feel about their own security?
Well, first of all, no doubt that it was unbelievable failure of our intelligence and of our army leadership, and in fact, our political leadership, that in Israel, there suddenly can be maybe the biggest pogrom in the modern history, that in a few hours, 1,400 citizens can be tortured and killed and kidnapped, taken as hostages. And that's the first shock. Having said all this, I have to say that the reaction of the society was so quick and so immediate, and society, like in a few hours, it turned from one of the most polarized societies, and really we had few years of extreme polarization. It turned into one close family where everybody tries to be very good to the other, where suddenly, first time that I remember, there is no left and right. There are no tensions between ultra-religious and even ultra-religious and secular, where some basic things like that we cannot rely on peace with the dictators, which sometimes you think that you're speaking like nobody really understands what you're talking about. And now they became like axioms. And where everybody understands that this time we cannot simply to respond, we have to destroy this enemy, to eliminate this enemy called Hamas, because simply people will not live in it, definitely will not go back to the south of Israel if they have such a neighbor. This neighbor doesn't have to exist. It's absolutely like the West couldn't accept some kind of peaceful solution with Hitler. That's more or less what Israeli society feels about Hamas. So there is a lot of, I would say, a lot of pain. Look, we go from one funeral to the other. funeral of a soldier who fell yesterday, and funeral of the person who was tortured and killed 5 weeks ago, but only now it could be identified. So it's really very painful times, but at the same time, the times which like turn Israel into the society which becomes more and more confident, more and more ready to use its real power, and it becomes like one fighting family. That's what we have now.
You find that the sense of security, Israel, obviously, Israelis always worry about security of Iran building up nuclear weapons. Obviously, there've been more attacks, more unrest in the West Bank, among the Palestinians, more attacks on Israelis from Palestinians this year. So not that security issues have gone away, but do you think Israelis have felt like there's just this underlying sense of insecurity, or you feel like they're past that already in there?
No, first of all, it's clear that if we will not restore this feeling of security, there will be no Israel. So we really have to restore it and restore quickly. I would say that the failure of intelligence, I think intelligence is working very hard to prove that it restored its power. In fact, we see how in fact all the military operation today goes in military terms very successfully, because it's a really unique operation of its kind. And there is the closest cooperation between intelligence, between the army and the air forces. Really, you could never see how many Hamas leaders are killed from the air, because intelligence had knowledge exactly where they are, where they go out of tunnels and so on. And it's very difficult that our troops move ahead, giving the new targets, and the airplanes are attacking these targets, and they are 150 meters from our troops. So it's really, and tunnels, 500 kilometers, it's what, 350 miles of the corridors of this underground town. So it all needs a lot of cooperation between this. So it's restored. But if Hamas will not be finished, if we will not if we'll have as our neighbors the terrorists who use the power of the state, in fact, to destroy us, there will be no feeling of security. So yeah, we and by the way, everything became more simple. There was like every officer, before saying to open the fire, was thinking twice, because then he will be taken to the court whether he opens the fire when there was already threat or not. Now everything became very simple. We saw what they are doing to us. We saw these absolutely awful pictures of rape, of burning families alive, and putting all this on the internet in order to scare all the Israelis to go away. So I think in the last weeks, thousands of terrorists were killed, and people on the left and people on the right feel absolutely equally that until we will not finish them, we should not stop.
Okay. Let me ask you on that. There's this came up in the interview with you in the Wall Street Journal, that you were a strong opponent of Oslo, and you quoted that your exchange you had with Ariel Sharon about disengagement with Gaza, of which you objected. I think you resigned from the government because of that.
Yeah.
So how do you, given what you just described and what we've seen in the West Bank, and we don't need to belabor the Palestinian authorities, corruption, their sponsoring of terror, their so on. How do you see a way forward there? And I'll just add one thing on this. I was watching last night in two interviews that Ron Dermer, the current, you're very friendly with, the co-author of yours, the current Minister of Strategic Affairs, and perhaps most notably, former distinguished fellow at JINSA. And he was being asked, by MSNBC on one and other on Sky News, questions that could have been asked before 10/6. What about two-state solution and things like that? And you wonder, people's paradigm, it seems like, in the West, in many ways, have not changed. What do you think things need to be going forward, though, for Israel? What do you do in Gaza? I mean, I know given that you were opposed to what they did, the disengagement, what do you think is the way forward now?
Look, it goes even before Gaza. Before Gaza was Oslo.
Right.
And I wasn't in politics then. I was a relatively newcomer from the former Soviet Union. And I wrote my first article against Oslo 2 weeks after it was signed. Why? Because then our late Prime Minister, Yitzhak Rabin, said that it's good that Arafat doesn't have Supreme Court, doesn't have human rights organizations and free press, because he will defeat Hamas much easier than we can do it. Sorry. And so I wrote the article, what kind of neighbors we need. We're writing that, in fact, what we are doing now, we are taking the dictator, bringing him from Tunis to Palestinians. We are saying, now he will be your leader. And we are saying to ourselves, it's good that he is dictator. And in order he will be our dictator, we'll give him a lot of money. And that's it. And I was saying that it's our business what kind of neighbor we'll have, because if he is a dictator, he will do everything that his people will hate us, because that's how dictators survive. They are mobilizing their people against external enemy. And unfortunately, this point of view that it's not our business who is on the other side, because what is our business, whether they will deliver us peace. And in order they will deliver us peace, we have to act with stick and with carrot. And they have to know that we can punish them, and in the meantime, we'll give them enough money that they'll feel themselves comfortable to control their people and to fight our enemies. And I think that is ideology of Oslo. Later, when Hamas did defeat Arafat, that was the ideology of disengagement. And unfortunately, I have to say, I didn't find support neither on the left nor on the right. On the left, they were speaking about things, how to build peace in 50 years. We are speaking how to do peace immediately. On the right, we are saying that, it's not enough that we have problems with our democracy. We must have also now the problems with the democracy of our neighbors. Why should we care? So I hope that one of the first lessons which we got, that as long as your neighbors have zero civil society and definitely no democracy, the only thing which can protect us is our own military. And we cannot rely on this good interest of all these dictators, because the interest of dictators then is to keep under the control their people. For this, they need external enemies. They need to build empires, and we will never. And if they write in their constitution, both PLO and then Hamas, that they are going to destroy us, we should better believe them, and we should rely only on our military force. So I do hope that what will follow after this, it's not enough to destroy Hamas. It's very important not to let them rule the regime, which will be educating a new generation of Palestinians in hatred towards us. What was done in Japan, what was done in Germany, finally has to be done with our neighbors. And if we all of them said, but in Japan and Germany, they went so far that the free world had to defeat them. And after the defeat, of course, the free world could put some conditions. We are now in such situation. They went so far that we have to destroy them. And it's very unpleasant to see these destroyed buildings of Gaza. But what we can do if Gaza was a living shield from these terrorists who were killing us? And so after this, we really have to not to think how to find new dictator who will be brought to Gaza with our assistance, and in 10 years from now we'll have another war, but how to make sure that the rulers of Gaza will be interested to build life in the interest of their people and not in the interest of our destruction. And by the way, Ron Dermer, who is one of the few, I would say, maybe of my pupils who really agreed with me, and we wrote with him a book about it. So I hope that he is the right man in the right place to promote these ideas day after.
You, I assume you feel that, well, I don't want to assume anything. Does the Palestinian Authority based in Ramallah have any role in Gaza, you think, after this?
I hope not. First of all, Palestinian Authority is only as strong as we support it. So with the same success, we simply can have the rule of our army, because all their cooperation is based on their dependence on us. But you can say now that if Hamas will be destroyed, maybe they'll be more powerful. But look at the books produced by Palestinian Authority for the school children. It is the same books of hatred and the need to destroy Zionist enemy, and seeing all this history, modern history, as one big Nakba, one big tragedy of Palestinian people who suffer from these invaders. So they will bring their books. Instead of the word Hamas, that will be written Palestinian Authority. But it's absolutely the same teaching about the importance of destroying the Zionist enemy. I hope we will not impose Palestinian Authority on running people in Gaza.
You think, you referred to about the defeat in 1945, what happened in the U.S., but in both of those cases in Japan and Germany, and I don't know, I'm not an expert on the German and Japanese societies right after World War II, but I assume after the utter desolation, both those countries then suffered from the war, that they both recognized that this was a mistake, and there was change in both those societies, and almost in the other extreme at times. Do you think that's going to happen in
I think yes. Look, you can see in the last few days there are pictures of thousands and thousands and thousands people from Gaza moving from the north to south under the white flag. Why under the white flag? In order they will be protected by Israeli troops from the attacks of Hamas. Because finally, in fact, they were not permitted. Israel called everybody to move from the north to south, because we are going to attack all these tunnels which are under your houses. And many left, many were kept by Hamas. We were afraid to go. Now that Hamas fully lost its control over the earth, now they are mainly controlling what is under the earth. People start moving. And in fact, 2 days ago, some of them were still killed by Hamas activists who went out of the tunnels and shooting them. So now we have to protect them when they are running away from the north to the south in order not to be under the attack. I really believe that with the end of these dictatorships, people will start thinking why we have such an awful life, why we were living in refugee camps, and we were explained that it's all because of Israel, and then we became living shields, and our hospitals and schools were turned into the bases of Hamas, and then they went on all these crimes, and we have to pay for them. Well, I don't pretend that they are innocent. I simply say that inevitably, if there will be a situation in which dictatorship of Hamas doesn't exist, inevitably people start thinking why they're suffering so much. how far they will go in this reevaluation, whether they will be really willing to start civil society is a different thing. But no doubt that if we will volunteer to bring to them another dictatorial regime, and with the one more round of brainwashing, then no doubt nothing will change.
I wonder, although, and I want to talk about what's happening here in the West. I don't want to get there yet, but I don't know if in 1945 you had expatriate Germans or Japanese echoing 1930 slogans of these regimes. I don't know if you had in 1945 or 1946, Germans in other countries talking about living space and, all the echoing all the things that Hitler was talking about in the 30s. Is that going to pose a challenge here, you think, for in, let's say, just about Gaza? Because they have a lot of followers or supporters here in Europe that talking about, from the river to the sea. Do you think that will change also, what people say here? If there's
that's I don't know. That's another question. But
yeah.
Again, in Germany and in Japan, there was a lot of people, not only in 1945, but in 1950 and later, who were keeping their uniforms.
Yeah, that's true.
In the wardrobe. They couldn't go proudly to be part of this Nazi regime or this regime in Japan, but they were missing it. They know that there were people who were missing it, but with the time less and less. And no doubt that this terrible destruction, which technically was brought by America and allies to Germany and to Japan, but people in the end accused their own regimes in this destruction. So whether it can be exactly like there, I don't know. But no doubt that a lot depends from the world. The fact that then all the world was against Nazi regime and nobody was sorry of it being destroyed. The fact that today the legitimacy, mainly legitimacy for the regimes like Hamas is coming from Oxford, from Harvard, from Yale, from Penn, from
Columbia,
from all these centers, that the first reaction of this, the worst pogrom, the modern history, really the most awful, unbelievable pogrom in modern history, that these cheers will come from 40, whatever, 3 organizations from Harvard are saying, first they're saying that all awful things would happen, if happened, it's only because of Israel. And second, that's how liberation from colonialism looks. And so let's see in it the beginning of deep social change, of a deep revolutionary movement. And in fact, it is a continuation of the policy of the last 15 years, maybe. Only think, what's her name? Judith Butler, the queen of the critical theories at the university. Judith Butler, a professor, of course, and the leading mind in these progressive movements in America, like more than 10 years ago, speaking in Berkeley and answering the question, said that Hamas and Hezbollah, even if we disagree with something, but they are social movements, very important part of left global progressive movement, and we had to take it into account. It was so during all these years, there are terrorists themselves in the Middle East, and there are enablers, those who give them legitimacy, and that's intellectuals of the free world. So yeah, it is very important that I don't think that their opinion will influence on the behavior of the Palestinian people. But as long as terrorist organizations have hope that the West sooner or later will come to the understanding that they are partners, or they at least they have the right to exist, they will do everything to continue to exist.
Yeah, let me. I appreciate that, and I want to get. I have a couple more questions about Gaza, and then I want to ask you about Israel and some of these other countries. One last thing on this. By the way, Ron Dermer also in his interviews, also yesterday, also made historical references like you did to Nazi Germany, defeating them and what happened with Japan, and you have to re-educate these people. What do you? But who do you think Israelis will accept in terms of maintaining the order? Look, in those two cases that you mentioned, Japan and Germany, had U.S. troops that had to stay for several years. And then, I mean,
I do think that we'll need now to keep our troops for a number of years.
Yeah.
Look, we must have an opportunity. We'll destroy the base of terror, but we have from time to time to come and to see that they're not rebuilding it. Yeah. So I don't think we can agree that that our security from others will be guaranteed by anybody. Definitely not by international forces or United Nations or whatever, but what is simply nothing. But as to guiding everyday life of the Gazans, as to their economical life, as to their cultural life, as to their education, as to their police service, like fighting against the crime, I don't think we have to be involved. I don't want to control their life. I think, or there will be Palestinians who will be ready to lead in building also independent economy, which will not make people enslaved by their own leaders, as it happened under Yasser Arafat or in Hamas. That they will be interested to build the normal life in every way, and the most important, education. That yes, all the international bodies, whatever, will have control over that. There will be not education of hatred, and I don't want that we will be the police on education there. There must be some elements in Palestinian society. Now there are. I proposed it to Sharon 20 years ago. I proposed that let's have. There were very few Arab countries which recognized our right to exist. Let's ask them to run day-to-day business of Palestinians, and they have to find the good partners. We will only make sure that while guaranteeing our security, to make sure that they are not educating them how to hate us. But if it is countries who recognize us, it's much easier. I wrote this proposal 20 years ago, before disengagement, saying to Arik Sharon that that's much better than simply to leave it to terrorists. But today we have many other Arab countries who recognize us and who have much, as their leaders have a lot of experience in running their societies. So I definitely would be very interested to see how we can transfer some power to them. Again, as to the security, in the time being, after the shock which went through, I don't think Israelis will agree that anybody will be guaranteeing them their security. It's only our army which has to guarantee our security.
Okay, let's turn. You mentioned the Arab countries. Let's say take UAE. Let's take Saudi Arabia. Obviously, Israel already has normalization with UAE, and that has stayed throughout this turbulence here. There's it seemed like a lot of movement on normalization with Saudi Arabia. And obviously this crown prince, who actually JINSA, we met with him about last November, and he indicated to us what the conditions were for making peace with Israel, which have remained true. I guess you have raised that point. I guess I did, in this Wall Street Journal interview, I know you wrote the book on it how do you see how optimistic are you about Israeli relations with UAE, let's say, in Saudi Arabia, normalized? They're not democracies. course, UAE is a more liberal, relatively liberal society. You have the Saudis, who are the crown prince is liberalizing his society with women. How is that? Is that to Jews? How do you see that the chance for good, durable ties with countries like UAE and Saudi?
First of all, I am very optimistic. If there was anything optimistic in the last whatever years in the Middle East, that these accords.
Yeah.
I believe peace, so-called peace process, which usually starts from Oslo, from my point of view, was war process. And I was writing, we were writing with Ron, and I was writing myself, that that was the attempt to bribe dictators to have peace with us. And in fact, the situation, each time we had to suffer some attacks, then to counterattack, and then to start all the so-called peace process again. This time, it's agreements, in fact, on base of people to people. What that didn't happen with Egypt, that didn't happen with Jordan. Even today, if any Egyptian singer or Jordanian will decide to come and give some concerts in Israel, he will be killed the moment he comes back. That is the public opinion of these countries. Here we, on the signed agreement, and already thousands and thousands of tourists went in both directions. I think I'm the last Israeli who still wasn't there. Joint ventures and joint films and all types of cultural events, as if people were thirsty. They wanted this communication. So that's why I believe that that's the real way to build relations, to start a peace process. Now, important thing about democracy, because people say, oh, but you were writing to have peace only with democracy. I was never writing such nonsense. Americans and Churchill cooperated with Stalin's Russia to fight Hitler, and this was not a democracy. Whether you want or not, you find the way how to have some relations with practically every important dictator in the world, whether it is China or something. We cannot decide for the other people. We can encourage, we can create better conditions, we can link our policy with the fact what is happening in those countries, but if there are dictators, then, and I always saying, you cannot rely on the agreements with dictators because they have different agenda. So then, or you are you are building everything on taking security in your own hands. You don't rely on these agreements. You're simply checking each time. Or you are insisting or checking that there is some movement. Look, if you can arrest this criminal like Putin, or MBS before when he did what he did in in Iranian embassy with the journalist, what's his name? Remember when Saudi Arabia killed their dissident
Khashoggi. You mean
Khashoggi? Yeah. So if the world could bring those who are responsible for this to the international court, probably it was the right thing to do. But you cannot, as many other crimes which are happening made by different countries, and you cannot bring them to the court. So what you're doing then, when you're building relations with them, you're checking whether nevertheless they're trying to liberalize their society or not. America put Jackson Amendment, meaning that if you Soviet Union want to have free trade with us, you must have free immigration. It didn't bring immediate change, but definitely it influenced that there was started some changes, which in the end gave very important results. So you are linking in some way. In case of Saudi Arabia, of course you cannot simply deal with dictators if it's none of your business. But look, he in the past he made some crimes, but now he's really bringing to more and more liberalization. What's happening with the women? Who could believe 10 years ago that I remember what was the station. Who could believe that Jews can enter Saudi Arabia, in fact, as tourists, as businessmen, so there are changes. Maybe it's not enough, but you definitely can build your relations in the way that the more changes are happening, the more trustful are your relations. In the meantime, you always have to be more suspicious to the regimes who are not giving enough freedom to their people. So you have to be suspicious, but you can be less and less suspicious because really it seems that Saudi Arabia finally started moving in the right direction. And that's a big difference in comparison with, let's say, 35 years or whatever that I met practically every president beginning from Reagan and asked them about Saudi Arabia. Why you never link your policy with the question of human rights? And the answer always was, including my good friend, President Bush's son, that Saudi Arabia is not about human rights, it's about oil. And we have to take it into account. And I believe it's wrong. For the first time, America can say that their relations with Saudi Arabia are really based on some kind of linkage. So taking into account these two things, first of all, that the agreements which are signed or will be signed, but signed based on people-to-people contact, so it's from bottom up and not imposed on the people. And second, that nevertheless, there is some, let's say, beginning of civil society. In Emirates, it's much bigger. There is no so democracy, but there is real civil society. And in Saudi Arabia, hopefully it's emerging. So that's optimistic signs.
You say that liberalism is more important than democracy?
Liberalism is more important than democracy.
Yeah,
What
that
is democracy?
countries are. What I mean is that these countries are liberalizing is more important than democratic. Is what I mean by that.
Well, it's not clear what people mean by the word democratic because some people say that democracy means free elections. And that's one point of my disagreement with my friend, President Bush. And in our book with Ron Derham, we're explaining it that democracy is free elections and free society. If there is no free society, there is no democracy because it's not real election. So free society first, civil society first, and then it creates conditions for real democracy.
Okay. Let me ask you, you mentioned Putin. So let's talk about for a second about how what's happened on October 7th impacts Israeli relations with, let's say, Ukraine and Russia. Let's start with Ukraine for a second. Obviously, you were born in Donetsk, is that right? In Ukraine. And you've been a big advocate that Israel needed to be much more supportive about Ukraine in this war. And there hasn't been as much attention on this war since October 7th, since this has been dominating a lot of the news. But how do you see relations between Israel and Ukraine evolving over time, assuming that, there's some, settlement or some kind where the war ends or, where Ukraine is able to develop more itself without being bombarded, from Russia and so on. It's interesting, these two peoples, I guess, which you probably understand better than anyone. Obviously, there's been a history of, vicious anti-Semitism in Ukraine. Obviously, Zelensky himself is Jewish, but you have two countries that have been attacked that are fighting back very hard. And I wonder that fact, I don't know if every Western country would do that, honestly, today. But these two are, Israel and Ukraine. Do you think they probably might be two of the best right now militaries in the West among, not counting the United States. How do you see these two countries evolving in their ties?
Well, look, there is a lot of questions in one that you put about the nature of the war between Russia and Ukraine, about the nature of Ukrainian society, about relations between Ukraine and Israel during the war, about our future. I don't know from where to start.
Okay.
As you probably know, I was a strong support. I was appealing to our government from the very first hours of the war that we should, together with all the free world, support Ukraine in all possible ways. Because I was saying then that it's not the struggle for the piece of land, it's the struggle for the future, how the free world will be run. Because Putin wants to restore Russian Empire. He wants to change the laws, meaning that if the country near you is weaker, it should be afraid that you can invade. That's in fact how the countries lived in the past. That's what was tried to be changed after the Second World War. That was the idea of United Nations, so on, that countries should not be afraid of their neighbors, even if they're stronger, because there is some kind of order in this free world, some rules and so on. Putin wants to go back to the times of the Russian Empire, also to the times of Stalin. And in fact, that's why I was saying that Ukraine in this moment, it's all happened, is brought in the center of the history. Putin said that they are not a nation. They became more nation than ever before in their history. And it is our interest. The free world is blessed with this situation that there is a country which is fighting against the threat of the free world and doesn't ask to send soldiers, asks only weapons. So and that's why I was critical of the West, why they're not doing it, and then why they're doing it so slowly. And I was very critical of my own government, which had its own interest with Putin, and meaning that to have a free hand to fight Iranian influence in Syria. And Putin controls airspace in Syria. And that's why we have to be nice to Putin. That was the philosophy. And I made a lot of efforts to improve relations. I met with Zelensky a number of times during the war, and of course, I am in contact with Israeli leaders. I hope today's situation is really much better. And there is good perspective that from now on we'll be closer cooperating. And there are two reasons for this. One reason is that, in fact, we are in a very symmetrical position. There are two, Israel was all the time insisting that we are a Jewish democratic state. And the word Jewish became more and more irritated, or national state, became almost a negative word in the eyes of Western world. I heard it from a number of leaders in Europe 20 years, 15 years ago, that all our problems are because you are insisting to be Jewish state. It will be the state of all the citizens. We will not have this problem with Islamic terrorists. Of course, it's nonsense. But the idea that national democratic state, that is the best way to defend democracy, became very unpopular. So now comes Ukraine and rehabilitates this idea, because Ukraine is fighting for its right to be Ukrainian nation, and at the same time for its right to be free country and not to be a Russian colonial. And the world accepts it. The world accepts that yes, in order this country can fight against Putin, it must be national state. So there are two national democratic states who are fighting for their right, for their freedom, on the base of mobilizing their people on the base of their national states. And so that is a mutual fight. Now, and in addition, all the Israeli leaders had this illusion that we have strategic agreement with Putin and we can rely on it. And I have to say, in my reports from meeting with Putin 20 years ago, I was always writing that, yes, he is not an anti-Semite. He has a lot of sympathy to Israel as a Russian-speaking Jewish state. But when it comes to his strategic interests, Iran for him, and I was writing it 20 years ago, is the instrument to press on America. America doesn't want to recognize him as a superpower. It was then 20 years ago. So he will try to do it by showing that Iran can threaten them. And Syria is his beachhead in the Middle East. That it was before they entered, but it was already there, his closest partner. And when it comes to this, he will not think even for a moment to choose between Iran, Syria, or Israel. And somehow there was illusion that, but we have this strategic understanding, that's why we have to be neutral and so on. Now it's clear that, well, Iran was behind all what Hamas was doing. Russia, even if it wasn't physically behind, but Iran is the closest ally of Russia. There are not many allies. It is very valuable asset. And Hamas, after they did all these awful things, when all the world says terrorist organization, the leaders come to Russia and Putin embraces them. So now when it comes to choose, Putin's representative in the United Nations said that no, Israel doesn't have a right for self-defense because it's a colonial state. So I do hope that now the last illusions about where the heart and hand of Putin really is. And so now I hope that the last this type of problem in our relations with Ukraine will be removed. I really expect that really in the days to come, we will start building very strong partnership.
Okay. Let me ask you, I mean, by the way, well, let me just ask you one quick follow-up on that, because your point that, you know, Putin was philo-Semitic or not anti-Semitic, so that anti-Semitic animus will not drive his policy to Israel. But could you still argue, yes, things are really what they were before. He doesn't hate Israel, he doesn't hate Jews, but he'll pursue what he thinks is in his interest or Russia's interest, even that means staying close with Iran as they are, and even welcoming Hamas. But could you argue if his interests shift?
Okay, look, it's really very, I would say, dangerous statement, which I did in the past, and I continue to believe it. Knowing him, knowing his policy towards Jewish, to Jewish population in Russia, he doesn't persecute Jews for them being Jewish. That's if we understand anti-Semitism, the one who hates Jews for being Jews and tries to persecute, he is not like this. But in today's world, there are many those whom I will call anti-Semites who hate Jewish state and work against Jewish state, like those professors from Harvard. So, and they say that they love Jews, and we say that anti-Zionism and anti-Semitism is the same. That's why we have to be very careful. But Putin is criminal, international criminal. He is dictator. He is a very dangerous person. But what to do? Not every dictator hates Jews for them being Jews. Now, at the same time, you have to understand, if it is in the interest of his policy to fight, to support enemies of Israel, he will do it. If it is in the interest of his policy to let anti-Semitism in Russia to go out, because that's how he can control his people better, he will play with this. The fact that they were now anti-Semitic, almost pogrom. It wasn't pogrom only because there was no Jews, but the crowd was looking for Jews and was ready to beat them.
In Dagestan.
In Makhachkala, in Dagestan. You have no doubt that, of course, Putin didn't order it, but these people understood, they knew somehow that authorities will not punish them for this. And there are thousand ways in which a dictator can give his people to understand. So now that he lost some of the control over his people because of his war with Ukraine, if in order to restore this control, he will have to play with anti-Semitism, he will play with anti-Semitism. He will have no problem with it. So you decide whether you call this anti-Semite or not. But from the, as I was saying many times, the fact that he loves Jews doesn't mean that Jews will ever love the world which he tries to build. To the contrary, it's very bad for Jews and very bad for the free world, what he's trying to do.
Do you think Jews that remain in Russia should be looking at Dagestan as a real warning sign for them? Possibly.
Yeah, well, if they still need some warnings, I don't know how many warnings they can get, but no doubt that the fact, it's a reminder of the fact that that deep on the base of Russian Empire always was anti-Semitism, And the moment authorities permit it to go up, it will go up. And it seems that authorities losing their control over the country will do it. So yes, Jews should take it very seriously.
One final question, and is you've referred a number of times, and I read what happened at Harvard and Columbia and so on. And how do you take a step back for a second? I mean, you grew up when East-West were very important. People don't use the term West maybe as much as they used to, but how would you, the way you see the world is reacting, both the leaders and the people in different ways, obviously in different countries, how do you take what is your assessment of the state of what, we might call the West still?
Well, that's really difficult. In my times, it seemed morally clear that here is regimes which deprive people of human rights. First of all, freedom of thought, freedom of word, freedom for people to decide where they want to live and how they want to vote. And there are countries who don't permit it because their stability depends on controlling over their people. And there are countries where governments depend on their people. So they cannot even undermine this intrinsic right of their citizens to speak their opinion, to live where they want to live, and to vote the way how they want to vote. It was very clear there are two different worlds. There was a problem, and sometimes people in the West were, as Lenin, I think, was the first who called them useful idiots. So they really thought, okay, we have our own problems, they have their problems, let's be friends. And some, even in the times of the most awful atrocities of Stalin, when they were ready to be deceived, to be duped, and try to say, well, Stalin is a very serious partner, let's work with him. So, but in general, everybody understood the principal difference. And that's why when the West really had to fight against aggression of the totalitarian world, they had this very powerful weapon in their hands, this desire of the people to be free. And I think the one who used it fully was, of course, President Reagan, who said, Soviet Union is an evil empire. People are enslaved there, and that's why it will find itself, communism will find itself in the dustbin of history. And he worked accordingly, and that's what happened. Now, today, the problem is that it is so confusing. It's oh, look, all these countries became free. Now Soviet, Russia, and all the others are free. Why should we challenge them in any way? And what is more dangerous, that on the intellectual level, on the academical level, these neo-Marxist theories, and Marxism was based, I grew in this the Marxist-Leninist world, where every year we had to pass exams, the essence of which was all the world is divided between oppressors and oppressed. Oppressed are always right. Oppressors are always wrong. If you, we must have red terror against oppressors. We have to prohibit oppressors to speak publicly, because that's makes situation with the oppressed even worse. And so as a result, as Lenin once wrote, that if for this great idea of the equality, you have to kill few hundred capitalists, oppressors. So that's what we have to do. And that's how they killed tens of millions of people for the sake of this equality. You have, of course, nothing like this today in the free world, but you look, you have again and again this so-called critical series, which divides the world on oppressed and oppressors. Or it is white against black, or it is men against women, or it is straight against gays, or it is Israel against Palestinians. It's all these critical theories. There are four branches of critical theories, and oppressor is always right. You should not give the right to oppressor to speak because it creates an uncomfortable place for this. And there is no such thing as freedom of free speech. Free speech only if it is politically correct. And what means politically correct? It means that it doesn't create uncomfortable situation for the oppressed people, whether, whatever it means. And that's this strange theories, which can be, as an intellectual exercise, it's going to be very interesting. But let's go to the language and see where there are prejudices of whites against the blacks in the language. It's absolutely legitimate as an academical study. But when it becomes the base for social activity, for political activity, it's very dangerous. And first time I saw it in the universities like 20 years ago, when I remember how I was shocked when some students in Harvard Business School told me that we wanted very much to sign this letter in support of Israel, but we know that for some of our professors, they will be very much against it, and it can influence on our career. And on Columbia University, more or less the same, but was said, but I started doing it, I lost all my friends. Then 20 years ago, they didn't exist, the word cancelled. But the fact what he said, and I was cancelled. So I don't want to be cancelled. I don't want to be on the side of oppressors. And you suddenly see how it becomes deeper and deeper, this simplistic neo-Marxist ideologies are becoming more popular. Of course, since then, now it is not only popular, it's in fact running the academic world. And as a result, we have this absolutely unbelievable situation when some professor is giving a lecture about microaggression. Microaggression, how sensitive you have to be not to insult anybody, microaggression. And then gives credit to all his students who go to the demonstration, death to Israel. That's this neo-Marxist philosophy in the heart of the free world. That's why this division between free world and not free world is not so clear. So I think we have to stick to the philosophy of the free world, to understand that equality, not equity, equality, that's absolute value, and that in the image of God created man, what means that all the people are equal, and there must be absolute freedom of speech, and nobody should be punished for his or her views, and that's it.
Yeah, I think it's a good note. Natan, I want to thank you very much. Very grateful for all your time. I know you don't like hearing this, but I always think you're the greatest Jew alive today, and it's been that way for many decades. So it's a great honor and to have you with us. And thank you.
Those of you who are in Washington or even not, please come to our demonstration on the 14th of November in Washington, in National Mall at 1 o'clock. Jews and their friends will be demonstrating against Hamas and against their enablers in America.
Yes, that's good. Thank you for bringing that up. Thank you, Natan.
Thank you
very much. Bye-bye. Thank you all for joining us. Bye.